Hey guys, it's Shay, and this is the Evidence Locker. Before we get into our case, I want to apologize for my few week hiatus. I did have bench press nationals, which I placed third in, and then we've been seeing different doctors for my daughter and trying to figure out what's going on with her. But we are back, and this is Solved Saturday. Today, we are covering the case of Alison Botha. Alison Botha was born September 22, 1967, in Port Elizabeth to parents Brian and Claire. The family split up pretty early on in Alison's life, and that left Claire to care for Alison and her brother Neil, who was only a year and a half older than Alison. And she had a relatively normal childhood considering everything, including the split. Alison, once she graduated high school, went on to a year of secretarial studies. After this, she traveled the world for 4 years and had the time of her life. She did eventually return to Port Elizabeth and begin working as an insurance broker. However, everything would change. December 18th, 1994. Alison was 27 years old at the time. It was a Sunday, and Alison had spent the day with her friends at the beach. And then, after the beach, they decided to go to Alison's apartment to hang out. Around 1 a.m., Alison drove her friend, Kim, home, and when she got back to her apartment, she realized her normal parking spot had been taken. So she went and parked up the road. It was within walking distance of her place, and the parking lot was rather small, so this was a fairly normal occurrence. However, as soon as Alison parked, a man with a knife forced his way into her car and forced her over into the passenger seat. He opened the driver's door and held a knife to Alison's throat and told her, quote, "Move over or I'll kill you." The attacker then took control of the car and told her he didn't want to hurt her. He just wanted to use her car for like an hour or so. And while the man was driving around with Alison, they made small talk. Obviously, she didn't really want to, but she's trying to stay alive and get on his good side. And she tells the man that her name is Susan, and that she has a boyfriend waiting at home who will begin to worry about her soon. And her kidnapper tells her that his name is Clinton. Alison told Clinton that she wouldn't report him to the police, just let her out of the car. Clinton obviously refused, and he took her to another location, where he picked up a second man. The two men then took Alison to a secluded area just outside of Port Elizabeth. Alison didn't know where she was, but it was a place called Nordhoek, and this is where things get bad. If you want to stop listening now, I understand, but it is important that we discuss this case. And it was at this point the men told Alison they were going to rape her, and they asked, "Are you going to resist?" And she knew that she couldn't stop them, and she felt powerless. She wanted to do anything she could to stay alive, so she told them no, she wouldn't resist. They then forced her to remove her clothes, and the man who said his name was Clinton forced her to perform oral sex, and then he forced the same onto her. He then proceeded to rape her once he was finished. He then invited his accomplice to do the same, who also raped Alison and choked her, after which they then suffocated her until she was unconscious. Once Alison was unconscious, they proceeded to disembowel her. She was stabbed at least 30 times in her abdomen and her pubic area, although this number could easily be in excess of 35 times, and miraculously, Alison survived this. But the men weren't done with her yet. They proceeded to slash her throat approximately 17 times, and when they were done, one of the men said, "Do you think she's dead?" And the other responded, "Nobody can survive that." One of the men who attacked Alison was reported to be obsessed with mutilating her reproductive organs, So clearly there was some motive for him there, and I don't know the psychology behind it necessarily, but there has been a lot of speculation onto what his motive was, and likely he just had a deep hatred for women. So after the attack, the two men drive away in Allison's car, and as they do, they throw Allison's clothes out the window. But they don't know that Allison is still somehow alive. Allison managed to regain consciousness. She had no idea where she was. She was laying naked on the ground, in pain, in the middle of nowhere. And despite everything she had just gone through, she had the presence of mind to write what she thought her attackers' names were in the sand, so that when she was found, they would have a lead. And then, heartbreakingly, she also wrote, "I love you, Mom," underneath. So she wrote the names Tien's and Franz in the sand, and after writing her message to her mom, she laid there for a while. And I mean, her injuries were severe. Like, she was probably just waiting for the darkness to set in. I can't even begin to imagine what she was going through or thinking. And then she thought to herself, I have to get up. Allison saw lights in the distance, and they were moving, so she knew she was somewhere near a road. And she thought to herself, if I can get to that road, I might be able to survive. And at first, she tried to crawl to the road, and she realized that wasn't going to work, so she stood up, and everything just goes dark. And this is because her neck was slashed so much, she was almost decapitated. Her head fell backwards when she stood up, and she was looking right at the sky. So, in order for her head to stay upright, she has to hold it in place with one of her hands as she's walking. And not only is she holding her head in place, she's using a piece of clothing to hold her organs in place, as they were literally spilling out of her abdomen as she moved. So she's holding her head in place, holding her organs in place, and is still managing to walk towards the road. Like, I can't even imagine the strength this took. And something that's insane but medically interesting is her windpipe was crushed when they suffocated her and choked her. And she would have died from that, from not being able to breathe, due to the crushed windpipe. However, them slashing her throat below the crushing injury created an opening in the windpipe that allowed her to breathe. Along with all this, Allison's vision was going in and out, obviously, from all the blood loss and injuries, and at points she was practically walking blind, and it made it harder for her to get to the road. And it was such a painful trek. And she finally got to the road, and she just collapsed into it. She couldn't stand up anymore or wait for help, and she just lay there hoping that somebody would stumble upon her and stop and help her. And it was 2 a.m. around this point, but it wasn't necessarily a secluded road. So thankfully there were still cars driving occasionally by every few minutes. And one of the cars driving stopped in front of her. And at this point she was freaking out. She was thinking, oh my god, they're back to finish me. But then the car just sped away. And she felt devastated. And that's heartbreaking. I can only assume they did that because they thought whoever did that to her was still out there and may try to attack them. But still, I mean, you don't know what you would do in that situation. It's just, I don't even know. But thankfully, someone else came along. Another car pulled up, and in this car was a young man named Tian. And he decided to stop and get out of the car and help Allison. And by this point, it'd been about an hour and a half since she had been abducted. He got out of the car to go to her and help her, but she could barely communicate because of her injuries, obviously. She couldn't speak, and she looked terrified. He said her eyes were bloodshot, and there were multiple other people in the car with him. Thankfully, one of them had a phone. So they called emergency services to come and help. And it's pretty good luck that one of them had a cell phone because this was 1994. So obviously it's not like now where everyone has like an iPhone they can just pull out and use whenever. Something else to note about Tion, the man who found her, is he was a veterinary student. So he had a good understanding of medical procedures, and I guess this was a blessing because he put Allison's thyroid back inside her body and then managed to keep her awake and alert until EMS arrived. Was talking to her, asking about her life and her family, and Allison obviously couldn't respond, so she would squeeze his hand once for yes and twice for no. And EMS took 1 hour and 45 minutes to get there from the first call. It ended up taking 4 phone calls for them to get there. And when they finally got there to pick up Allison, on their way back to the hospital, they were apparently driving super slow. And Tion said, like, you guys need to speed up, she's dying. And they refused. I mean, I guess they believed she was gonna die either way, so there wasn't much of a rush. Thankfully, they finally get to the hospital, and one of the doctors said he had never seen such a severe case. Allison had her intestines sitting on top of her torso, and her torso was filled with beach sand and charcoal from extinguished fires. And after inspecting her injuries further, they realized she would likely never be able to carry a baby. And the general surgeon who was called in to operate on Allison was shocked as well. He said it gave, quote, a striking impression of cruelty. And I'm pretty sure everyone was surprised she had even made it to the hospital, and no one thought she would survive an operation. However, Tion had pushed her thyroid back inside her body, and it turns out her thyroid was cut in half, which is usually completely fatal. I had to look this up because I was curious about what part of cutting a thyroid made it fatal, but there is a list of like 6 or 7 things that cutting a thyroid causes, and pretty much all of them are fatal, so it's just shocking she survived having her thyroid cut at all, let alone all of her other injuries. Something else that's crazy is she was stabbed over 30 times, and all of them managed to somehow miss her vital organs. And they began operating on Allison as soon as they could. Like, as soon as she got there, they started prepping her for surgery. And they had to clean every single organ from all the sand and dust and everything that was covering them to prevent sepsis, and then they had to put them back in place. The surgery lasted hours, and Allison managed to survive. One of her doctors said it was just a plain old miracle, but I think he should take some of that credit because without the doctors and nurses she had, she wouldn't have survived, I don't think. Within 12 hours of being nearly decapitated, Allison was already awake and talking to the police, trying to assist them with their investigation. Police showed her multiple photos of different potential suspects, and she immediately pointed out 2 of them. These 2 men, Franz and Tians, had previously been known to police. They were arrested for rape, and Franz had actually been arrested for the rape of 2 women, and Tians had been arrested for the rape of 1. And they were both awaiting their trials, and somehow, while awaiting trial, they were just allowed out and about, no ankle monitor, no nothing, and they were out torturing, trying to kill another woman. Allison pointed out the photos, She actually wrote their names on the back of them, the ones she had heard them call each other. And cops told her it would make the prosecution stronger if she could verbally identify them. And this was going to be pretty difficult. For one, she was almost decapitated, and now she had ventilation tubes down her throat, providing oxygen to her lungs, and she couldn't really talk with all that in. Doctors were scared to remove the tubes so soon after surgery, and they were worried about damaging her throat. But the officers were kind of persistent, and Alison agreed to it. So they removed the ventilation from her throat, and she was able to say my attackers were Franz and Tians, and they were arrested on December 19th around 5 a.m., a little over 24 hours after they had attempted to murder Alison. They were charged with a plethora of offenses, including kidnapping, rape, and the attempted murder of Alison. One of the police officers in an interview later said Franz was initially confused when he was told he was being charged with attempted murder. The officer explained that Alison had survived the attack, and this is when Franz basically said, "Well, there's nothing I can hide from you because she will obviously tell you everything that happened." The two men appeared to show no remorse for their actions, and on December 29th, Franz and Tians appeared before the magistrate's court, and they were ordered to undergo 30 days of psychiatric evaluation. And during that time, they were held at Poldmore Prison. The two of them both indicated that they were going to plead guilty, but the police continued their investigation and collected DNA from both men, and analyzed and examined the crime scene. Just in case they changed their minds and decided to plead not guilty, so it's important that they did have a case, just in case. And while all of this was going on, Alison was still undergoing numerous surgeries. She was finally released from the hospital just before New Year, but she had to go back to the hospital daily to have her wounds treated. She had horrible injuries and a very long road to recovery. And the worst was the abdomen. She had to go in every day to have the wounds scraped until they bled so that new cells could grow. She also had to undergo plastic surgery, and to this day she still lives in extreme pain and ongoing medical complications. But she is alive against all odds. And on March 23rd of the following year, Franz and Tians had their pre-trial hearing. They were going up against 8 charges, multiple counts of abduction, indecent assault, and rape. They were also being charged with 1 count of attempted murder, 1 count of robbery, and they pled guilty to all 8 charges. Franz, however, pled not guilty to the charge for his initial rape that he committed, and nobody knows why he pled not guilty, but it's assumed that because there was a lack of physical evidence, he assumed there wouldn't really be any trial anyways. Then, on June 12th, 1995, the trial of the century for South Africa started. What's crazy is when this trial happened in South Africa, they had a law there that a victim had to have their hand on the perpetrator and have a photo like that to prove that the victim was identifying the perpetrator, which the law was changed eventually, thankfully. But Alison, she had already identified her attackers, and she had to have a photo taken with her hands on them. Tians pretty much just accepted what was happening at trial. He knew he wasn't going to get away from this, but Franz, however, did testify. Franz tried to take the blame off himself. He said he was a Satanist, and that it was a demon called Incubus who told him to rape all the women and to murder Alison. And basically, he was just trying to take as much of the blame off himself as possible and justify what he did. Like the, devil made me do it, but it wasn't working. And to nobody's surprise, on August 7th, 1995, both men received life in prison. Franz actually received 3 life sentences, and Tian's received 1 life sentence plus 25 years. And this was 2 months after South Africa abolished the death penalty, sadly. The judge on the case even said that if the death penalty was still considered constitutional, he probably would have imposed it. Alison went on to marry a couple of years later and eventually have 2 children. She was able to carry them on her own, which she was extremely grateful for, especially after the attack she suffered and the uncertainty around that. Alison ended up writing a book, and Tian, the man who stopped to help her that was in vet school, ended up becoming a human doctor, not an animal doctor. And he even assisted in the birth of Alison's second child. It's great to have such a happy ending at the end of such a horrific case. I am extremely happy that Alison is living a life that she enjoys and that Tien's and Franz can never hurt anyone ever again. This has been The Evidence Locker, written and recorded by me, Shay, and edited by my husband, Toby. We post every Wednesday and Saturday, Unsolved on Wednesday, Solved Cases Saturday, and we really appreciate you supporting this channel. Give us a like and a follow, and leave a review. Let me know what other cases you want to see covered on this channel. Stay curious, stay safe. Join us next week as we open another locker.